Across cultures, through the darkest corners of human imagination, lurks a creature of insatiable hunger. It stalks the night, drains the living, and embodies our deepest fears of death, disease, and the unknown. From the frost-bitten lands of Eastern Europe to the sun-drenched sands of ancient Egypt, the vampire's shadow persists, an immortal entity woven into the very fabric of global folklore. But what if this pervasive terror, this bloodthirsty stalker of the night, wasn't born from pure supernatural evil, but from something far more tangible, more terrifyingly real? Prepare to journey back thousands of years to a world teetering on the brink of an environmental apocalypse, to an age when the earth itself convulsed, spewing fire and ash, darkening the very sun. In the wake of such unparalleled destruction, crops withered, disease spread, and humanity struggled to comprehend a world suddenly plunged into an endless twilight. Could the monsters of our nightmares, the pale skin, the aversion to sunlight, the thirst for life itself, be echoes of a literal darkening of the sun, a global climate catastrophe that traumatized humanity to its core? This is the story of when fire met blood, an extraordinary investigation into how ancient eruptions forged vampire legends. Over the next 25 sections, we will unearth geological evidence, delve into forgotten historical accounts, and dissect the very fabric of folklore to reveal the startling scientific genesis behind one of humanity's most enduring and chilling myths. From the shadowed crypts of ancient Eastern European folklore to the shimmering, high-definition screens of Hollywood blockbusters, one creature reigns supreme in the pantheon of terror: the vampire. It is a presence that transcends borders, a chilling archetype etched into the collective human consciousness. Across cultures and continents, the tales persist of an undead entity, cursed to stalk the night, sustained by the very lifeblood of the living. For millennia, this nocturnal predator has haunted our dreams and fueled our darkest imaginings. In ancient Sumerian texts, we find echoes of the Akato, a spectral being that consumed the essence of the living. In China, the Jiangshi, or hopping corpse, lurks in the shadows, animated by supernatural forces. From the Strazyga of Polish lore, a half-human, half-demon entity, to the Aswang of the Philippines, a shape-shifting creature of malevolent hunger, the core elements remain terrifyingly consistent: an unholy resurrection, a relentless thirst for blood, and an inescapable curse of eternal damnation. What is it about this particular monster that grips humanity with such enduring power? Is it the fear of death, twisted into an eternal, unholy mockery of life? The primal terror of being consumed, drained of our very vitality? Or perhaps the allure of forbidden power, of immortality purchased at the ultimate price? The vampire is a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties: disease, pestilence, isolation, and the terrifying unknown that awaits beyond the grave. Whether depicted as the elegant, aristocratic Count Dracula, the tortured soul of a romantic anti-hero, or a grotesque, feral abomination, the vampire embodies a fascinating duality. It is both seductive and monstrous, a symbol of eternal life that brings only death. Its characteristics are now iconic: pale skin, piercing eyes, an aversion to sunlight, a taste for blood, and often an unnerving charm that belies its predatory nature. These are the threads that weave through countless narratives, from the chilling prose of Bram Stoker's seminal novel in 1897 to the modern phenomenon of global franchises, proving the vampire's cultural immortality. But what if the genesis of this pervasive fear, this monstrous myth, isn't purely a product of supernatural belief or psychological introspection? What if the horrifying shadow that stalks our nightmares was not born from the depths of hell, but from a cataclysmic event that literally darkened the sun and turned the world crimson? What if the monsters of our nightmares were forged not in the supernatural, but in the terrifying crucible of a scientific apocalypse? This is the radical proposition we explore: that the legendary vampire, in its most primal, terrifying form, may have been born from fire, ash, and blood. To understand the profound impact of such an event, we must first transport ourselves back in time, to a world utterly unlike our own, yet brimming with human ingenuity and vibrant culture. Our journey begins over 3.5 millennia ago, nestled beneath the azure skies of the Aegean Sea, in the heart of the Bronze Age. This was not a primitive world, but a sophisticated tapestry of burgeoning civilizations, interconnected by vast maritime trade networks and unified by a shared pursuit of knowledge and artistic expression. Imagine the islands of the Cyclades, dotting the Aegean like scattered jewels, each a vibrant hub of activity. Here, the Minoan civilization, centered on the magnificent island of Crete, reached its zenith. Their palaces, like Knossos, were marvels of engineering and art, adorned with vibrant frescoes depicting dolphins, bull leapers, and goddesses. They commanded a powerful thalassocracy, a sea empire whose ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, laden with olive oil, wine, pottery, and precious metals. Their influence stretched from mainland Greece to Egypt, from Anatolia to the Levant, forging an intricate web of cultural exchange and economic prosperity. On the island of Theran, now known as Santorini, a thriving port city called Akrotiri flourished. This remarkable settlement, often dubbed the Pompeii of the Aegean, was a testament to Minoan ingenuity and prosperity. Its multi-storied houses boasted sophisticated plumbing systems, intricate wall paintings, and advanced urban planning. The people of Akrotiri were skilled artisans, sailors, and traders, living lives deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the sea and the bounty of the land. They worshipped nature deities, celebrated seasonal festivals, and navigated a world where the natural elements, the sun, the sea, the earth, were both benevolent providers and potential bringers of wrath. Life in the Bronze Age Aegean was precarious, certainly. Earthquakes were not uncommon, and the threat of piracy always loomed. Yet, for all its challenges, it was a period of extraordinary growth, innovation, and cultural flourishing. People lived in close-knit communities, their fates bound together by shared harvests, common beliefs, and a deep respect for the established order. They were masters of their environment, or so they believed. What these burgeoning civilizations could not comprehend, however, was the immense geological power that lay dormant beneath their feet. The very islands they called home, the mountains that pierced the sky, were often the exposed crowns of colossal volcanoes. And one such volcano, an island unto itself, was slowly, imperceptibly, preparing to unleash a fury that would not only shatter the Aegean, but send ripples of chaos across the entire northern hemisphere, forever altering the course of human history, and, perhaps, giving birth to a legend that would terrify generations. The gentle rhythms of the Aegean, the prosperity of the Minoan world, were about to be shattered by an event so catastrophic, so utterly beyond human comprehension, that its echoes would reverberate for millennia. Around 1600 BCE, give or take a few decades, the island of Thera, the very island where Akrotiri thrived, was not merely an island, but the cap of a colossal stratovolcano. For centuries, it had been a sleeping giant. Then it awoke. What followed was one of the most powerful natural disasters in recorded human history, the Theran eruption. Scientists estimate its volcanic explosivity index, VEI, to be a staggering 7, comparable in scale to the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora, which famously triggered the year without a summer. But Thera was different. It erupted not just explosively, but also underwent a massive caldera collapse, plunging much of the island into the sea. The initial phase would have been terrifying, earthquakes escalating in frequency and intensity, followed by plumes of ash and pumice rocketing miles into the stratosphere. Eyewitnesses, had any survived on the island, would have seen the sky turn utterly black, choked with debris, raining down incandescent pumice that suffocated everything in its path. The sheer volume of material ejected was immense, blanketing Akrotiri under dozens of meters of ash, perfectly preserving its buildings and contents, a time capsule of a world tragically interrupted. But the worst was yet to come. As the magma chamber emptied, the weight of the overlying rock became too great. The island began to collapse inwards, creating a vast caldera, a deep crater now filled by the turquoise waters of the Aegean. This collapse triggered colossal tsunamis, waves perhaps over 100 meters high, that crashed onto neighboring islands like Crete, devastating coastal settlements, sweeping away fleets, and wiping out vital infrastructure. Geological evidence across the region, layers of volcanic ash, pumice deposits, and tsunami damage, provides undeniable testimony to the eruption's unparalleled destructive power. The very shape of Santorini today, its iconic crescent of cliffs enclosing a deep blue lagoon, is the stark, beautiful, yet terrifying memorial to this ancient cataclysm. Beneath those sparkling waters lies the collapsed heart of a monster, a testament to the raw, untamed forces of our planet. The eruption of Theran was not merely a local catastrophe. It was an event of global significance, an atmospheric weapon unleashed by nature, destined to plunge the entire northern hemisphere into a period of profound darkness and despair, setting the stage for horrors both real and imagined. The immediate devastation around the Aegean was unspeakable, but the true reach of Theran's fury extended far beyond the shattered islands and tsunami-ravaged coasts. What followed was not merely a regional catastrophe, but a chilling, global atmospheric phenomenon that plunged the northern hemisphere into a protracted period of darkness and cold, a volcanic winter. When Theran detonated, it didn't just eject ash. It blasted colossal quantities of sulfur dioxide gas high into the stratosphere, miles above the Earth's surface. Up there, undisturbed by weather systems, these gases reacted with water vapor to form microscopic sulfuric acid aerosols. These tiny, reflective particles acted like a vast, opaque shield, orbiting the globe, relentlessly reflecting sunlight back into space. The result was a dramatic and sustained reduction in solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface. For months, and even years after the eruption, the sun would have appeared muted, a pale, anemic disk in a perpetually hazy sky. Average global temperatures plummeted, particularly in the mid to high latitudes of the northern hemisphere. Ice core records from Greenland and Antarctica bear silent witness to this event, revealing distinct layers of volcanic sulfates precisely dated to the period of the Theran eruption, confirming the global spread of its atmospheric veil. This wasn't just a slight cooling. It was a fundamental disruption to the planet's intricate climate systems. Monsoon seasons in Asia could have shifted or failed entirely. Jet streams would have been altered, leading to unpredictable and extreme weather patterns. Regions accustomed to mild summers experienced unseasonal frosts and prolonged cold. Winters became harsher, longer, and more unforgiving. It was as if the very breath of the planet had been stolen, replaced by a lingering chill and a pervasive sense of gloom. Imagine looking up at a sky that no longer offered the reassuring warmth and light you had always known. The sun, the giver of life, was diminished, veiled, almost a phantom. For societies that depended utterly on the sun's rhythm for agriculture, for navigation, for warmth, this was not just an inconvenience. It was a cosmic betrayal, a sign that the very fabric of their world was unraveling. The stage was now set for the next, even more devastating act of this slow-motion apocalypse. Widespread famine, a desperate struggle for survival under a perpetually darkening sky. The volcanic winter was not an abstract scientific phenomenon. It was a brutal, existential threat to every living thing. For agrarian societies across the northern hemisphere, whose very survival hinged on the predictable cycles of planting and harvest, the altered climate quickly spiraled into an unprecedented catastrophe. The diminished sunlight and colder temperatures unleashed a devastating scourge, widespread famine. Crops withered in the fields. Grains, dependent on ample sun and specific temperature ranges, failed to ripen or yielded meager, stunted harvests. What little grew was often ruined by unseasonal frosts or torrential rains. From the Fertile Crescent to the developing civilizations of Bronze Age Europe, granaries stood empty. Once bustling markets fell silent. The predictable abundance that had sustained communities for generations vanished, replaced by gnawing hunger. Livestock, too, suffered immensely. Pastures turned barren, water sources froze or became contaminated, and without adequate feed, entire herds perished. The loss of cattle, sheep, and goats meant not only a dwindling food supply, but also the collapse of an entire economic system that relied on animal product for sustenance, trade, and labor. The intricate balance between humans, animals, and the land was utterly shattered, creating a ripple effect of desperation. Imagine the sheer terror of facing an empty plate, day after day, week after week, with no end in sight. Children grew frail, their cries of hunger echoing through once vibrant homes. Adults, their bodies weakened by starvation, became vulnerable to even the slightest illness. The psychological toll was immense. Despair became a constant companion, gnawing at the spirit as much as hunger gnawed at the flesh. People would have resorted to desperate measures, scavenging, fleeing their homes in search of food, or, in the darkest corners of human experience, perhaps even turning on one another. Archaeological records from this period often show evidence of abandoned settlements, mass graves, and shifts in dietary patterns, including the consumption of previously avoided foods, all pointing to extreme hardship. This era of widespread food scarcity would have plunged communities into a profound state of vulnerability, eroding social structures and shattering faith in the natural order. It was a world where survival was a daily struggle, where the very act of living became an act of defiance against a hostile, unforgiving planet. And in this crucible of suffering, under skies that no longer offered comfort, the seeds of ancient fears and monstrous legends were being sown. As if famine and cold weren't enough, the volcanic winter brought with it a suite of bizarre and terrifying atmospheric phenomena that preyed not just on the body, but on the very psyche of humanity. The immense quantities of ash and sulfur aerosols, still suspended high in the stratosphere, transformed the sky itself into a canvas of cosmic dread. The air wasn't just cold, it was alien. Imagine a world where the sun never truly shone with its full glory. Days were perpetually dim, cloaked in a pervasive gloom. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the atmospheric veil, resulting in prolonged twilight hours that blurred the lines between day and night. The familiar rhythm of the sun's journey across the sky was distorted, replaced by an unsettling, almost supernatural pallor. The world became a place of perpetual shadow, where every familiar landscape took on an ominous, otherworldly cast. But it was at dawn and dusk that the sky truly became a spectacle of terror. The scattering of light by the volcanic particles created sunrises and sunsets of unnerving intensity. Not the beautiful, vibrant hues we often cherish, but lurid, blood-red, or sickly purple displays that painted the horizon with apocalyptic colors. The sun, when it appeared, might be a featureless, bruised orb, or even split into multiple, distorted images by the atmospheric distortions. These were not the gentle harbingers of day or night. They were portents, signs of a world turned upside down. For people living in an era utterly devoid of scientific understanding of atmospheric physics, these ethereal light shows would have been profoundly unsettling. They would have interpreted them through the lens of their existing beliefs, as divine wrath, as the work of malevolent spirits, or as omens of unimaginable evil. The crimson skies, painting the desolate landscapes in hues of blood and fire, would have mirrored the terror in their hearts, solidifying a deep-seated fear that the gods had abandoned them, or worse, were actively punishing them. This wasn't just a temporary visual anomaly. It was a constant, daily reminder of the world's unraveling. Every sunrise and sunset was a dramatic, terrifying performance from an angry sky, reinforcing the sense of impending doom and the belief that powerful, unseen forces were at play. This psychological assault, combined with the physical ravages of famine and cold, created fertile ground for the growth of superstition, fear, and the terrifying idea that something truly monstrous had awakened. In the face of such overwhelming, inexplicable calamity, the darkened sun, the global cold, the devastating famine, the blood-red skies, humanity's ancient mind struggled to make sense of a world gone mad. This was an era utterly devoid of scientific meteorology or volcanology. People lived intimately with their gods, their spirits, and their superstitions. Without scientific explanations, the only recourse was the supernatural. The unprecedented disasters would have fostered an intense, pervasive fear, an existential dread that seeped into every aspect of life. Why had the sun, the life-giver, turned pale and menacing? Why had the earth, the provider, withheld its bounty? Why were the very skies painted with the colors of blood and death? The answer, to ancient peoples, was terrifyingly clear. The gods were angry. Or worse, malevolent forces had been unleashed, spirits of chaos and destruction. Rituals would have been performed with desperate fervor, sacrifices made, prayers whispered to appease deities. But when the calamities continued, when the sun remained veiled and the harvest failed again, fear would have curdled into a deeper, more sinister belief. Perhaps the gods were not just angry, but actively punishing humanity for some collective sin. Or perhaps the very balance between life and death had been irrevocably disturbed, opening a portal for entities beyond human understanding to stalk the land. This profound psychological trauma, this collective terror, created a fertile breeding ground for the emergence or intensification of monstrous myths. People needed an explanation, a tangible focus for their fear. The widespread death from famine, cold, and disease would have been particularly ripe for supernatural interpretation. Bodies that died during such times might not decompose normally in the cold. Survivors, delirious from hunger and fear, might misinterpret sights and sounds. The idea of the dead not truly resting, but rising again to prey on the living, would have gained terrifying currency. The fear wasn't abstract. It was personal, visceral. It was the fear of her neighbor, emaciated and desperate. It was the fear of the stranger, driven by hunger. It was the fear of the dark, now made darker and more menacing by a world where the sun had failed. In this climate of pervasive dread and desperate superstition, the stage was perfectly set for the birth of creatures born not of flesh and blood, but of collective horror, creatures that would embody the ultimate terror, a hunger that could not be sated, and a curse that defied death itself. As if the gods had not exacted enough retribution, the relentless cascade of calamities unleashed by Theran's fury had one more devastating blow to deliver. Famine, cold, and pervasive despair inevitably paved the way for another, equally terrifying scourge, widespread disease and epidemics. This final, brutal chapter in the post-eruption chaos would have been misinterpreted by terrified survivors in ways that cemented humanity's deepest fears into monstrous form. Mass starvation, prolonged exposure to cold, and the crushing psychological stress severely weakened immune systems across entire populations. Bodies, already frail from lack of sustenance, became highly susceptible to infection. Sanitation systems, if they existed, would have broken down under the strain of societal collapse and displacement. People driven from their homes in search of food would have carried pathogens to new, vulnerable communities, creating a perfect storm for the rapid spread of illness. Imagine the villages of the Bronze Age, already decimated by hunger, now struck down by mysterious illnesses. Fevers would have raged, leading to delirium and hallucinations. Victims might experience extreme pallor due to anemia or shock, their skin taking on an unnatural, ashen hue. Some diseases, like porphyria, though rare and often genetic, or certain forms of tuberculosis or anemia, can cause extreme light sensitivity, making sunlight unbearable. Others might cause blood to be coughed up or discharged, a terrifying and highly visible symptom. The deceased themselves would present a horrifying tableau. In colder climates, or during periods of prolonged cold, bodies might not decompose at the expected rate. This slowed decomposition, combined with gas buildup during the early stages of decay, could cause bodies to bloat, their skin to tighten, and even appear to move or groan as gases escaped. Blood, if present, might ooze from orifices as decomposition progressed. To the unscientific mind, these phenomena would be profoundly disturbing, providing proof that the dead were not truly dead, but reanimated, perhaps seeking the life force they craved in their unholy state. This terrifying intersection of physical symptoms, environmental conditions, and profound superstition created a crucible for the birth of the undead legend. The symptoms of plague and famine victims: emaciation, pallor, aversion to light due to weakness or fever, the presence of blood, and the unnerving appearance of improperly decomposed bodies, would have been interpreted not as medical conditions, but as the unmistakable signs of a malevolent, blood-drinking entity. In a world utterly broken by fire and cold, the vampire, as we know it, began to take its terrifying, immortal form. From the shadowy depths of folklore, the vampire emerges with a distinct, unsettling visage, deathly pale skin, hollow eyes, and an unnatural gauntness. But before this image became a staple of horror, it was a terrifyingly common sight in the real world. Imagine a Europe scarred by successive waves of plague, famine, and brutal conflict. For centuries, disease and starvation were not abstract threats, but relentless realities that carved their mark onto the very faces of humanity. Consider the brutal grip of the Little Ice Age, a period roughly spanning from the 14th to the 19th centuries, where prolonged cold spells ravaged harvests. Grain rotted in the fields, livestock perished, and entire communities teetered on the brink of collapse. The Black Death alone, which swept across Eurasia in the mid-14th century, wiped out an estimated 75 to 200 million people, a third of Europe's population. Survivors, and those who endured subsequent famines and epidemics like tuberculosis, typhus, or dysentery, bore the indelible signs of their ordeal. Picture a village street in 17th century Transylvania, or a bustling market in a plague-stricken city like London. You would have seen faces drawn tight over prominent cheekbones, skin stretched taut and waxy, utterly devoid of the healthy flush of life. This extreme pallor, known medically as anoxia or anemia, was a direct result of malnutrition and disease, where the body simply couldn't produce enough red blood cells. Emaciation, the visible wasting away of muscle and fat, left limbs skeletal and bodies fragile. Profound weakness, a constant companion, meant that even simple tasks became monumental efforts. These were not merely symptoms. They were a haunting transformation that blurred the line between the living and the truly dead. When such a person succumbed, their appearance in the coffin would have been shockingly close to the emerging image of the undead. With no scientific understanding of cellular decay or the impact of severe illness on the human body, an exhumed corpse exhibiting these characteristics could easily be mistaken for a creature that had been drained of its life force, its very vitality stolen. The pallor of death became inextricably linked with the draining touch of the vampire, shaping an image that would haunt human imagination for millennia. It's a chilling thought that the most terrifying monster might have been born from the very real suffering of our ancestors. As humanity grappled with the devastating physical toll of famine and disease, some individuals presented symptoms so bizarre, so profoundly unsettling, that they defied all conventional understanding. In an era before modern medicine, these rare conditions would have seemed like curses or perhaps even proof of something supernatural. Among them, one genetic disorder stands out, its clinical presentation chillingly mirroring many aspects of vampire folklore: porphyria. This inherited metabolic disorder affects the production of heme, a crucial component of hemoglobin in red blood cells. When the body's enzyme pathways for heme synthesis go awry, toxic precursors, known as porphyrins, build up in the body. The effects can be devastating. Patients with severe forms of porphyria, particularly congenital erythropoietic porphyria or Gunther's disease, exhibit extreme photosensitivity. Their skin, exposed to sunlight, would develop painful blisters, lesions, and ulcers, often leading to disfigurement, particularly around the nose, ears, and fingers. Imagine the terror of being unable to venture into daylight without excruciating pain and permanent scarring. This debilitating aversion to the sun, a hallmark of vampire lore, finds a haunting explanation here. Beyond the skin, the condition caused other grotesque transformations. Porphyrins could deposit in the teeth, staining them reddish-brown, a fearsome sight that might have been interpreted as teeth stained with blood. Gums could recede dramatically, making the teeth appear elongated, almost fawn-like, especially the canines. In severe cases, the facial cartilage could erode, further distorting features and giving a monstrous appearance. Neurological symptoms were equally disturbing. Acute attacks could bring on anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, and even aggressive, delirious behavior. Such a person, driven by pain and madness, might lash out, bite, or exhibit a terrifying lack of self-control. Their urine, too, could turn reddish or purplish upon exposure to light, an unusual bodily fluid that would undoubtedly fuel dark superstitions. In a world where superstition was fact and medical knowledge was limited, an individual suffering from advanced porphyria would have been a terrifying enigma. Forced to shun the sun, often disfigured and prone to episodes of madness, they would have been ostracized, feared, and perhaps even targeted. Their existence, a living embodiment of suffering and deformity, could easily have woven itself into the fabric of evolving vampire legends, lending a visceral, human face to the monstrous myths of the night. Porphyria provides a stark reminder that sometimes the most horrific stories are rooted not in pure fantasy, but in the tragic realities of human illness. If porphyria offered a terrifying blueprint for the vampire's appearance and aversion to light, another ancient scourge provided a brutal explanation for its savage aggression and thirst for blood. Rabies, a horrific viral disease transmitted through the bite of an infected animal, has terrorized humanity for millennia. Its symptoms, agonizing and utterly transforming, would have been profoundly unsettling to any observer, perfectly aligning with the emerging tales of bestial, bloodthirsty creatures that stalked the night. Imagine a world without vaccines, where a simple bite from a rabid dog, fox, or even a bat was a death sentence. Once the rabies virus incubates and reaches the brain, it unleashes a cascade of terrifying symptoms. The afflicted often develop a profound fear of water, known as hydrophobia, making even the thought of drinking unbearable, leading to agonizing spasms. This very symptom could have easily been misinterpreted. An aversion to holy water, a defense against the pure, life-giving element, a classic vampire weakness. But it's the behavioral changes that truly resonate with vampire lore. As the disease progresses, victims can become hyperactive, agitated, and intensely aggressive. They might snarl, foam at the mouth, and lash out with uncharacteristic violence, driven by excruciating pain and neurological damage. The compulsive need to bite, an instinctual urge driven by the virus itself to spread to new hosts, creates a horrific image. This frenzied, uncontrollable aggression, coupled with profuse salivation that appears like foam or even bloody froth, would have been undeniably monstrous to an uncomprehending populace. Furthermore, rabies often disrupts sleep patterns, leading to insomnia and nocturnal wandering, completing the picture of a creature that hunts under the cover of darkness. The swift, agonizing descent from sanity to savage madness, the foaming mouth, the unquenchable urge to bite, and the nocturnal restlessness. These were not just symptoms. They were a living horror show that perfectly embodied the primal fear of the beast within. For villagers watching a loved one succumb to rabies or encountering a rabid animal or person, the line between human and monster, between life and undead, would have blurred irrevocably. Rabies, a disease of the blood and nervous system, truly offered a terrifying, real-world genesis for the ferocious, animalistic aspects of the vampire myth, transforming the sick into literal beasts of the night. While disease and physical ailments provided frightening prototypes for the vampire's appearance and behavior, the deepest dread often sprang from an even more primal fear, that death itself was not always final. In an age devoid of sophisticated medical diagnostics, premature burial was a horrifying, though relatively rare, reality. The consequences of such a mistake weren't just tragic. They were utterly terrifying, planting seeds of undeath deep within the collective psyche. Throughout history, medical knowledge was rudimentary at best. Physicians lacked stethoscopes, electrocardiograms, and the nuanced understanding of consciousness and biological processes we have today. Conditions like catalepsy, a trance-like state characterized by rigidity of the body and diminished sensitivity to pain, or severe comas induced by illness, poisoning, or injury, could easily mimic death. A person might appear to stop breathing, their pulse barely perceptible, their body cold and stiff. Without definitive signs like rigor mortis or decomposition, they could be declared deceased and swiftly interred, often within hours in warm climates or during epidemics. Imagine the terror of awakening in absolute darkness, confined within the suffocating walls of a coffin, buried beneath 6 feet of earth. The desperate struggles, the muffled screams, the frantic clawing at the wooden lid, a horror almost beyond comprehension. And then, imagine the discovery. Perhaps a grave was later exhumed for reburial, or due to erosion, or even grave robbing. To find a body not peacefully at rest, but contorted in agony, clothing torn, fingers scraped raw against the coffin lid, perhaps even signs of struggle within the confined space, this would have been irrefutable, terrifying proof that the deceased had not truly been dead. They had returned, not as an angel, but as something desperate and monstrous. These grim discoveries fueled widespread panic. Tales of vampire outbreaks in 18th century Eastern Europe, like the famed cases of Petr Blagojevich and Arnold Pole, often describe exhumed bodies found looking fresh, with signs that they had moved or struggled. Such findings were not merely unfortunate accidents. They were confirmation of the undead walking among the living. The fear became so pervasive that safety coffins were invented in the 19th century, equipped with bells or flags to alert those above ground if a supposedly deceased person revived. Premature burial was not just a medical error. It was the ultimate betrayal of mortality, offering a concrete, chilling explanation for the belief that the dead could rise again, not in spirit, but in horrifying, physical form. Even when death was undeniable, the subsequent process of decomposition, when poorly understood, offered its own gruesome narrative for the existence of the living dead. In an era before forensic science, the natural changes a body undergoes after burial were often misinterpreted as irrefutable evidence of a corpse's continued, albeit monstrous, activity. Proof that the deceased had not truly found rest, but was instead an active predator from beyond the grave. Consider the common post-mortem changes. After death, the body's cells break down and anaerobic bacteria begin to proliferate within the gut. This bacterial activity produces copious amounts of gases, methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, which cause the body to bloat significantly. The abdomen swells, the face distends, and the skin can take on a taut, engorged appearance. To an uneducated observer, such a bloated corpse, particularly if exhumed days or weeks after burial, might seem to have been recently engorged with blood, appearing fat or full, not shrunken by decay. As the gases build up, internal pressure increases. This pressure can force fluids out of the body's orifices, the mouth, nose, and eyes. This discharge, often reddish-brown due to the breakdown of blood, would have been particularly alarming. Imagine exhuming a body to find fluid seeping from its mouth, appearing like fresh blood. This chilling sight was frequently interpreted as the corpse having recently fed, draining the life from other victims. Furthermore, as the skin dries and retracts, hair and fingernails can appear to have grown longer, even though they do not actually grow after death. This optical illusion added to the mystique, suggesting continued vitality. Perhaps most unsettling was the occasional fresh appearance of some corpses. Depending on soil conditions, temperature, and depth of burial, decomposition can be significantly delayed. Bodies buried in cold, dry soil, or those protected by heavy shrouds, might remain relatively intact for an extended period. When exhumed, such a corpse, lacking significant decay, could be declared a vampire, its pristine state proof that it was not truly dead, but merely resting between its nocturnal hunts. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries in regions like Eastern Europe, reports of fresh corpses, bloody mouths, and distended stomachs were often the primary evidence used to identify a vampire, leading to brutal rituals of staking and dismemberment. These unsettling, yet entirely natural, transformations offered a visceral, tangible horror that fueled and solidified the belief in the vampiric undead. Even the sanctity of the grave, intended to provide eternal rest, was frequently breached by forces both natural and nefarious. Beyond the internal processes of decomposition, external disturbances to burial sites offered yet more proof that the dead were restless, or worse, that they were actively returning to plague the living. In times of social upheaval and pervasive superstition, any disruption of a grave was fraught with terrifying implications, solidifying beliefs in restless spirits and the malevolent undead. Imagine an isolated village graveyard, surrounded by dense forests. Wolves, wild dogs, and other scavengers were a constant threat, often digging up newly buried bodies or disturbing older graves in search of food. A grave found with the earth disturbed, perhaps even bones scattered, would immediately trigger alarm. Was it merely a hungry beast, or was it the deceased themselves, clawing their way out of the earth? The footprints of animals could easily be misidentified as the tracks of an unholy creature, or the telltale signs that the vampire had left its tomb. Then there were the human disturbances. Grave robbing, driven by desperation for valuables, or for body parts used in folk medicine, witchcraft, or grisly rituals, was a pervasive problem throughout history. An open coffin, a missing shroud, or the removal of limbs would undeniably indicate that the grave had been violated. But in a world gripped by fear of the undead, it was often easier to believe that the corpse itself had risen, breaking free from its confines, rather than confront the gruesome reality of human sacrilege. The discovery of an empty coffin, or one from which parts were missing, could be interpreted as the vampire having shed its mortal shell to walk again, or having literally consumed its own flesh. Natural phenomena also played a role. Heavy rains could cause flooding, dislodging coffins, and washing away earth to expose skeletal remains. Earthquakes or landslides could likewise disturb burial grounds, scattering bones and opening graves. In a pre-scientific age, these acts of nature were often seen as omens, signs of divine displeasure, or worse, proof that the very earth itself could not contain the malevolent dead. From the scavenging animal to the desperate grave robber, to the capricious forces of nature, every disturbed grave served as a chilling omen, adding weight to the growing narrative of the undead. These intrusions into the resting place of the dead weren't just unfortunate events. They were interpreted as direct evidence of the supernatural, further cementing the vampire's place in the darkest corners of human belief. While the immediate precursors to vampire legends often appear in later European folklore, the very concept of the restless dead and their interaction with the living has ancient roots, stretching back to classical antiquity. To truly understand how these myths evolved, we must first descend into the Greek underworld, a foundational realm that shaped ideas of death, the soul, and what happens when the boundary between worlds is breached. For the ancient Greeks, death was not necessarily an end, but transition to a vast, shadowy realm ruled by the formidable god Hades. This underworld, also named Hades, was not a place of torment for most, but a dreary, sorrowful existence. The souls of the dead, known as psyches or shades, were depicted as faint, insubstantial echoes of their former selves, devoid of memory and true vitality. They drifted aimlessly, forever separated from the sunlit world of the living. To reach this realm, the deceased had to cross the river Styx, guided by the ferryman Charon, requiring a coin placed under their tongue as payment. Without proper burial rites or payment, a soul might wander eternally, trapped between worlds, a truly horrifying fate. Crucially, the Greeks also revered powerful chthonic deities, gods and goddesses associated with the earth and the underworld. Figures like Persephone, queen of the underworld who spent part of the year in the realm of the dead, or Hecate, goddess of witchcraft, crossroads, and ghosts, held immense power over the nocturnal and the unseen. Their domain was the dark earth, the depths where spirits dwelled, and their presence often evoked fear and reverence in equal measure. These deities bridged the gap between the mundane world and the terrifying supernatural, influencing beliefs about malevolent spirits and dark magic. Proper burial was paramount in Greek society, not just for the deceased's peace, but for the safety of the living. Unburied bodies, or those denied proper rites, could result in angry, restless spirits haunting the living. These shades, though generally weak, could be a source of ill omen or misfortune. The Greek understanding of the afterlife, therefore, laid a critical foundation. It established a realm for the dead, a clear, yet permeable, boundary between life and undeath, and powerful chthonic forces that governed the shadowy world. This framework of restless souls and powerful dark deities provided the conceptual landscape upon which more specific and terrifying legends of returning, malevolent dead would soon be built. It taught humanity to fear not just death, but what might happen if the dead were not properly laid to rest. Building upon their rich tapestry of death beliefs, the ancient Greeks didn't stop at mere insubstantial shades. Their folklore also birthed entities far more terrifying and tangible, monstrous figures that were direct predecessors to the blood-drinking vampires of later European lore. These were not mere ghosts. They were flesh and blood horrors, hungry for vitality and known to snatch children from their beds. These early Greek proto-vampires represent some of the earliest documented beliefs in nocturnal, malevolent, and often bloodthirsty monsters. Perhaps the most ancient and unsettling of these is the Strix. Described by Roman poets like Ovid, the Strix was originally an owl-like bird, often associated with ill omens and the night. Over time, its legend evolved, depicting it as a monstrous, nocturnal creature with a large head, piercing eyes, and sharp talons, capable of shape-shifting. Its most horrifying characteristic? The Strix was said to feed on human flesh and blood, particularly targeting infants and young children, tearing them from their cradles and draining their vital fluids. These attacks often left the child pale and lifeless, a chillingly familiar image. The Strix, therefore, perfectly embodies the nocturnal hunt, the monstrous form, and the blood-drinking aspect that would become central to vampire myths. Equally disturbing were the Empusi, attendants of the goddess Hecate. These shape-shifting demons could appear as beautiful women to lure travelers, particularly men, into their clutches. Once ensnared, the Empusa would reveal its true, horrifying form, a creature with one leg of bronze and the other of an ass, often with fiery hair. They would seduce their victims, feast on their flesh, and drink their blood. The Empusa's ability to appear deceptively human, only to reveal a monstrous, bloodthirsty nature, strongly prefigures the deceptive allure and hidden horror of the later vampire. And then there was Lamia, once a beautiful Libyan queen, cursed by Hera to become a child-eating monster after Zeus fell in love with her and Hera killed their offspring. Lamia, often depicted with a serpent's lower body, would steal and devour the children of others, perpetually tormented by her own loss. While not strictly blood-drinking, her nocturnal child-snatching, monstrous appearance, and association with sorrow and malevolence resonate with later vampiric traits. These ancient Greek creatures, whether the avian Strix, the deceptive Impusa, or the tragic Lamia, provided a foundational terror. They solidified the concept of a predatory, blood-drinking, child-snatching entity tied to the night and the underworld, creating a powerful legacy that would echo across cultures and centuries, shaping the very image of the monster we call the vampire. As Greek maritime, trade, and military might expanded, so too did its cultural tendrils, weaving into the very fabric of the burgeoning Roman Republic. With the adoption of Greek gods and myths came the assimilation of their deepest fears, fears of the unquiet dead. But Rome, ever the pragmatist, molded these anxieties into its own distinct, terrifying forms. No longer just shades in Hades, the Roman conception of the restless dead became far more immediate, far more threatening. Enter the lemurs and larvae. These were not mere ghosts. They were malevolent spirits, the tormented souls of those who had died tragically, violently, or without proper burial rites. The lemurs, in particular, were described as spectral beings, often associated with the unavenged dead, returning to haunt the living, to punish those who failed to uphold the delicate balance between the living and the deceased. They were the vengeful echoes of a life cut short, forever tethering themselves to the world they had so abruptly departed. Roman homes, often considered sanctuaries, were believed to be vulnerable to these spectral intruders. The anxiety was so profound that an annual festival, the Lemuria, was established specifically to appease these dangerous entities. For 3 nights in May, the paterfamilias, the head of the household, would rise at midnight barefoot, performing elaborate rituals. He would walk through his house, spitting black beans behind him, chanting, "I redeem myself and my household with these beans." The belief was that the lemurs would follow the beans, allowing the family to escape their grasp. He would then clash bronze vessels, urging the spirits to depart, ancestral spirits. It was a desperate plea, a primal act of warding off the invisible predators that could snatch peace, sanity, or even life itself. The larvae were often depicted as even more terrifying, grotesque specters, a direct result of wicked lives led or violent ends met. Unlike the potentially placated lemurs, larvae were purely malevolent, embodying the purest form of dread. They were the literal nightmares, creeping into homes, causing madness, illness, and despair. Roman culture, with its rigid structure and emphasis on order, found the idea of chaos from beyond the grave utterly horrifying. These entities solidified the concept of dangerous, powerful beings returning from the abyss, not merely as philosophical musings, but as an ever-present, tangible threat that demanded vigilance and ritualistic protection. The foundation was being laid, stone by terrifying stone, for a new kind of revenant, one that would transcend borders and languages. From the disciplined anxieties of Rome, our journey takes a stark turn, pushing eastward into the vast, ancient, and often harsh landscapes of Slavic lands. Here, amidst dense, foreboding forests and isolated villages, far from the philosophical debates of the classical world, the concept of the malevolent dead took on a far more visceral, terrifying form. It was here that the true precursors of the modern vampire began to coalesce, the vapor and the euper. These were not the ethereal larvae or the appeasable lemurs. These were corporeal horrors. The Slavic revenant was the body of a deceased person, often someone who had died prematurely, violently, or outside the confines of Christian rites, which was believed to rise from its grave. They were driven by an insatiable hunger, returning to prey upon the living, most chillingly upon their own families and neighbors. The descriptions were horrifyingly specific. Bloated corpses with ruddy complexions, nails and hair still growing, sometimes with a sinister smile on their lips. And central to their terror was their method of sustenance, blood. The Uper was intrinsically linked to the consumption of blood, draining the life force from victims, leaving them pale, weak, and eventually dead. This wasn't merely a metaphorical act. It was a literal, gruesome thirst. Tales described them as attacking livestock first, then moving on to humans, often targeting the weakest members of the community, infants, the infirm, and women. The fear was palpable, a daily dread that your loved ones, once laid to rest, could return to terrorize the living, bringing disease, unexplained deaths, and agricultural blight. Villagers lived in constant fear, developing elaborate and often brutal methods to prevent such a monstrous return. When an unexplained illness or death swept through a community, suspicion would inevitably fall upon the recently deceased. Exhumation was common, leading to macabre discoveries often misinterpreted as proof of vampirism. Bodies that hadn't decomposed as expected, blood around the mouth from natural decomposition processes, or simply the psychological projection of terror. The solutions were grim, staking the corpse through the heart, decapitation, burning, or burying with stones in the mouth to prevent feeding. These weren't tales told for amusement. They were survival guides, desperate measures against an unseen enemy born of fear, disease, and the pervasive darkness of the unknown in a world struggling to comprehend the causes of death and pestilence. The Slavic lands brewed a potent draft of fear, giving birth to a monster that would soon haunt the imagination of an entire continent. As the Slavic lands wrestled with their own nocturnal terrors, a seismic shift was occurring further south. The relentless expansion of the Ottoman Empire, a colossal force bridging east and west, pushed deep into the Balkan Peninsula from the 14th century onwards. This wasn't just a military conquest. It was a profound cultural intermingling, a collision of traditions, beliefs, and fears. And in this melting pot, the nascent vampire legend didn't simply survive, it intensified, diversified, and solidified its terrifying grip. The Balkans, a crossroads of empires, religions, and ethnic groups, became fertile ground for the evolution of the Revenant. Here, indigenous Slavic beliefs about the Uper blended with Ottoman folklore, Byzantine influences, and localized superstitions. The Ottoman concept of jinn, mischievous or malevolent spirits, and other jinn-like entities, may have subtly woven into the existing narratives, adding new layers of dread and unpredictability to the returning dead. Each village, each valley, seemed to harbor its own terrifying variant, creating a complex tapestry of vampire lore. This era saw an explosion of documented vampire panics. As the Ottoman Empire's influence spread, so did new diseases, often interpreted as the work of the undead. Medical knowledge was still rudimentary, and communities, plagued by epidemics and inexplicable deaths, readily attributed their suffering to a monstrous, supernatural agency. Cases like that of Peter Plagojewicz in Serbia in 1725, or Arnold Pole, also in Serbia a few years later, became infamous. These weren't mere whispers. They were official reports, documented by imperial administrators and military surgeons, detailing the exhumation of bodies believed to be vampires, their fresh appearance and presence of blood interpreted as undeniable proof of their monstrous activities. These reports, often sent back to Vienna and other European capitals, sparked a macabre fascination. The accounts described specific rituals, the staking, the burning, the severing of heads, actions deemed necessary to finally put the undead to rest. The Ottoman expansion, paradoxically, helped disseminate these specific, blood-curdling tales of the Balkan Revenant across a wider European consciousness, transforming localized folklore into a widespread cultural phenomenon. The Balkans, scarred by centuries of conflict and supernatural dread, became the heartland of the vampire myth, a place where the borders between life and death seemed terrifyingly thin, and where ancient fears found new and horrifying expressions. As the chilling tales of Balkan vampires spread like wildfire across Europe, sparking both dread and fascination, another powerful force was quietly gathering momentum. the Age of Enlightenment. This intellectual revolution, beginning in the 17th century and peaking in the 18th, championed reason, empiricism, and scientific inquiry over superstition and dogma. The very idea of the undead, a creature born of ancient fears and unexplainable phenomena, suddenly found itself under the harsh, unblinking scrutiny of philosophers, physicians, and naturalists. To the Enlightenment mind, the lurid accounts of vampires rising from their graves, bloated and blood-stained, were not proof of the supernatural, but rather symptoms of ignorance. The era's leading thinkers, like Voltaire, ridiculed the notion, attributing such beliefs to the barbarism of the East. However, others, driven by a thirst for knowledge, sought tangible, rational explanations for these terrifying occurrences. Physicians, in particular, stepped forward. They began to meticulously examine the evidence presented in official reports. What seemed like miraculously preserved corpses with fresh blood on their lips was often explained by the natural processes of decomposition, especially in colder climates or specific soil conditions that could slow decay. Gas buildup within a decomposing body could cause bloating and even force blood from orifices, creating the illusion of recent feeding. The growth of hair and nails was understood as the retraction of skin, making existing features appear longer. Medical conditions also offered compelling explanations. Porphyria, a rare blood disorder, could lead to extreme photosensitivity, receding gums, making teeth appear longer, and anemia, perhaps inspiring some of the vampire's physical traits. Rabies, with its violent symptoms, aversion to light and water, and biting, could easily be misidentified as demonic possession or vampiric attack. Even tuberculosis, which caused pallor, wasting, and coughing up blood, might have contributed to the myth of an entity draining life. Perhaps most profoundly, the fear of premature burial, being mistakenly interred alive, fueled anxieties about bodies returning from the grave. This era marked a pivotal turning point. The Enlightenment didn't eradicate the fear of the undead overnight, but it armed humanity with the tools of critical thinking and scientific method. It moved the vampire from the realm of unquestioned supernatural dread into the laboratory, the anatomical theater, and the dissecting room, attempting to strip away its monstrous mystique and expose the underlying biological and psychological truths. Yet, even as science began to offer its logical explanations, the seed of the vampire, once planted, had taken root too deeply in the human imagination to be easily excised. Even as the Age of Enlightenment sought to dissect and rationalize the vampire, dismissing it as mere superstition, another powerful cultural current was rising, the Romantic era. This movement, with its embrace of emotion, the sublime, the mysterious, and the supernatural, proved to be fertile ground for the undead to not only survive, but to evolve into something far more alluring and enduring. The folkloric revenant, once a bloated peasant corpse, was about to undergo a radical transformation, moving from dusty village records to the glittering, gaslit pages of Gothic literature. Early Gothic tales like John Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, introduced the world to the aristocratic, seductive vampire, Lord Ruthven, a creature of high society and dark charisma. This was a significant departure from the grotesque Slavic Yupper. But it was in the late Victorian era, amidst anxieties about foreign invasion, sexual repression, and societal decay, that the vampire achieved its most iconic form. In 1897, an Irish theater manager named Bram Stoker unleashed a novel that would forever etch the vampire into the global consciousness, Dracula. Stoker's masterpiece was a culmination of centuries of myth and emerging literary trends. He meticulously researched Eastern European folklore, accounts of vampire panics, and even the historical figure of Vlad the Impaler, weaving them into a narrative of profound psychological depth and thrilling suspense. His Count Dracula was not just a monster. He was a sophisticated nobleman, a creature of ancient evil and immense power, capable of mesmerizing his victims with his piercing gaze and aristocratic charm. Dracula was an outsider, an invader, threatening the purity and order of Victorian England, a perfect vessel for the era's xenophobic and moralistic fears. Stoker's stroke of genius was to infuse the primal fear of the revenant with elements of forbidden sexuality, social transgression, and aristocratic decadence. The act of blood-drinking became a chilling metaphor for seduction, corruption, and the loss of innocence. The vampire's immortality, once a source of dread, now held a perverse allure. Dracula transcended its literary origins, becoming a cultural touchstone. It solidified the image of the vampire as a nocturnal predator of refined tastes, a master disguise, and an embodiment of dark, irresistible desire. The ancient fears, once rooted in disease and famine, were now reimagined as a sophisticated, psychological terror, forever changing how humanity would perceive the creatures of the night. From this point forward, the vampire was not merely a monster to be avoided. It was a character to be explored, a symbol to be deciphered, and a legend destined to endure. Even as science continues to unravel the mysteries of the natural world, even as the Enlightenment's rational gaze continues to penetrate the shadows of superstition, the vampire myth steadfastly refuses to die. Indeed, it thrives, adapting, transforming, and reaffirming its powerful hold on our collective imagination. In an age of advanced medicine, space travel, and digital connectivity, why do these ancient creatures of the night continue to haunt us? The answer lies in the vampire's remarkable adaptability and its potent symbolic power. The vampire is not a static monster. It is a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties and desires. In its original form, it embodied the primal fear of contagion, unexplained death, and the breakdown of community. With Bram Stoker, it became a symbol of aristocratic decay, foreign threat, and forbidden sexuality. Today, it reflects a myriad of modern concerns. Consider the themes. Immortality, once a curse of endless suffering, can now be seen as an ultimate escape from mortality, a dark fantasy in a world obsessed with eternal youth. The predator/prey dynamic speaks to our anxieties about power, control, and the vulnerability of the human body. The vampire's struggle with its own monstrous nature can symbolize the internal battles we face with our darker impulses, our desires that might harm others. In contemporary culture, vampires have become everything from romantic heroes navigating complex moral dilemmas to angsty teenagers wrestling with their unique identities. From the brooding, Byronic figures of the 19th century to the sparkly heartthrobs of the 21st, the vampire morphs to suit the cultural landscape. They challenge our definitions of life and death, morality and sin, humanity and monstrosity. They embody the allure of the forbidden, the terror of the unknown, and the seductive promise of power beyond mortal limits. They are outsiders, often beautiful and dangerous, forcing us to confront our own prejudices and our fascination with the other. Perhaps the most compelling reason for their endurance is their origin in our most fundamental fears. The fear of death, yes, but also the fear that death is not the end, that something far worse might await us or return to us. The vampire taps into a deep, evolutionary wellspring of apprehension about what lurks in the darkness, about the inexplicable forces that can steal our vitality. They are a constant reminder that even in our technologically advanced world, some shadows refuse to dissipate, some whispers of ancient dread continue to echo, ensuring that the vampire will forever be an unsettling, yet utterly captivating, companion to the human story. We have journeyed through centuries of evolving terror, from the Roman lemurs to the seductive Count Dracula, yet the true genesis of this fear, we believe, lies further back, buried deep beneath layers of ash and time. To understand the root, we must return to the initial premise. What if the monsters of our nightmares were born from a literal darkening of the sun, from a world thrown into chaos by a catastrophic volcanic eruption? The Theran eruption, a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, plunged the ancient world into an ash-darkened twilight. The immediate aftermath was not just a geological event. It was a human catastrophe. The skies turned strange colors, the sun was obscured, temperatures dropped, and crops failed. Famine inevitably followed, leading to widespread malnutrition and disease. Entire communities perished, their numbers dwindling rapidly, leaving survivors haunted by the memory of a world turned upside down. How do human beings cope with such profound, inexplicable trauma? How do they make sense of an environment suddenly hostile, where the very forces of nature seem to conspire against them? Through storytelling. Oral tradition became the vessel for cultural memory, transmitting the raw, terrifying experiences of the eruption's aftermath across generations. The ash-laden air, the strange light, the pallor of the sick, the inexplicable deaths. These were not forgotten. They were woven into narratives, transformed into warnings, and eventually into myths. The pale skin of famine victims, the coughing of those afflicted by ash-related respiratory illnesses, the blood coughed up by disease, the slow decay of bodies that might have been buried hastily or shallowly in desperate times. These became the physical attributes of the returning dead. The inability to understand widespread plague and agricultural blight led to the personification of these scourges. If crops failed, it must be something stealing the vitality from the earth. If people died en masse, something must be draining the life from the community. These collective traumas, passed down through campfire stories, lullabies, and cautionary tales, became the foundational elements of regional folklore. Each telling might have added a new detail, localized a character, or enhanced a supernatural explanation, moving further from the scientific reality, but deeper into the psychological truth of their experience. The persistent image of a pale, hunger-driven entity that preys on the living, born from a time when the sun itself seemed to die and the world was plunged into a desperate struggle for survival, suggests a chillingly direct lineage. The ancient world, reeling from fire and blood, began to whisper tales of a creature that would forever embody its deepest, most primal fear. When faced with terrifying, inexplicable deaths and the spectral echoes of past traumas, whether from volcanic fallout or subsequent plagues, ancient communities were not passive. They fought back. Lacking scientific understanding, they developed elaborate rituals and protective measures, born of desperation and deep-seated fear, aimed at preventing the dead from returning. These practices, often gruesome and deeply symbolic, reveal the intense societal anxiety surrounding the concept of the revenant. The most infamous method, and one that persisted for centuries, was staking the corpse through the heart. The logic was brutally simple. Incapacitate the body, prevent its movement, sever its connection to the living world. Wooden stakes, often made from hawthorn or ash, were believed to possess particular protective properties. Decapitation was another common tactic, often followed by placing the head between the legs or away from the body, an act intended to disorient the undead spirit and prevent it from reuniting with its form. In some cases, stones or bricks were placed in the mouth to prevent feeding, a direct response to the perceived bloodlust. Garlic, with its pungent odor, became a ubiquitous symbol of protection across many cultures. Its strong scent was believed to repel evil spirits and purify the air, a natural remedy against the unseen contagion. Crosses, holy water, and other Christian symbols became crucial as the vampire myth intertwined with religious beliefs, portraying the revenant as an unholy entity. These weren't just folklore details. They were tangible tools in a spiritual war. Burial rites themselves became steeped in protective measures. Bodies suspected of being potential vampires might be buried face down to confuse the spirit, forced to dig deeper into the earth rather than towards the surface. Limbs might be bound, or heavy stones placed over the grave to anchor the deceased. These were not acts of disrespect, but desperate attempts to ensure eternal rest for both the dead and the living. When these preventative measures failed, and a community suspected a vampire, exhumation became a terrifying necessity, leading to macabre scenes of villagers disinterring a corpse searching for signs of undeath and performing their grim rituals. Archaeological discoveries across Europe continue to unearth evidence of these practices. Skeletons with stakes driven through their chests, headless burials, bodies weighed down by rocks. These findings are not just grim curiosities. They're a poignant testament to the profound fear that gripped our ancestors, a fear so potent that it compelled them to fight monsters born of trauma, disease, and the long, dark shadow of inexplicable death. The vampire, in its earliest form, forced humanity to confront its own mortality and invent powerful, if terrifying, ways to fight back. The echoes of Theran's catastrophic eruption, a cataclysm that redefined the ancient world, resonate far beyond geological strata. As the dust settled, or rather, as it drifted for years across continents, it left behind more than just a changed landscape. It left an indelible mark on the human psyche. We have journeyed through the immediate horror, the global darkness, and the ensuing climate chaos. Now, we confront the terrifying truth. This cascade of natural events did not just influence ancient myths. It became the very crucible in which the darkest of our nightmares, the vampire, was forged. Imagine a world where the sun itself was a stranger, veiled by a perpetual shroud of ash. For years, the skies were bruised, painting sunsets in hues of unnatural, terrifying crimson and violet, not of beauty, but of foreboding, a sky bleeding onto the earth. This wasn't just a metaphor for the ancients. It was a visceral, daily reality. The very air they breathed carried the dust of a distant apocalypse. This eternal twilight was fertile ground for the seeds of fear, for whispers of unseen entities that thrived in the gloom, preying on the living in a world turned upside down. Then came the relentless cold, the crop failures. Famine, a silent predator more insidious than any monster, stalked the lands. Weaker populations, already traumatized, succumbed to starvation, their bodies emaciated, eyes sunken, skin pallid, haunting resemblances to the undead creatures that would soon populate folklore. Disease inevitably followed, sweeping through communities already on the brink. The inexplicable, rapid deaths, the unholy pallor of the victims, the desperate, uncharacteristic acts committed by the starving, all fed into a horrific narrative. A father, driven to madness by hunger, might steal food, or worse, be accused of consuming the flesh or blood of the deceased, acts that, in times of extreme stress, could be twisted into the horrific origins of a blood-drinking monster. The psychological trauma inflicted by such an enduring era of suffering cannot be overstated. Generations lived under a pall of fear, witnessing unimaginable hardship, mass death, and the breakdown of societal norms. In such an environment, the line between life and death blurred, and a desperate search for meaning in the face of incomprehensible devastation led to the creation of monstrous explanations. The Theran eruption, geological nightmare, didn't just alter the atmosphere. It altered the human imagination, creating a shared, global dread that required an explanation, a scapegoat, a symbol of the profound evil that had befallen the world. And so, from the ash and the blood, from the famine and the fear, the vampire began to rise, a chilling, enduring legacy of fire meeting blood. Our journey through millennia has revealed a startling truth. The enduring myth of the vampire, far from being solely a figment of supernatural fear, likely finds its primordial roots in the Earth's most cataclysmic forces. We have traced the chilling parallels between the devastating aftermath of the Theran eruption, the perpetual twilight, the famine, the disease, the pervasive pallor, and the very characteristics that define the undead. This documentary has illuminated the profound interplay between real-world natural phenomena, the fragile human psyche grappling with incomprehensible disaster, and our innate drive to create narratives that make sense of chaos. Humanity, faced with a sunless world, widespread death, and ecological collapse, crafted a monstrous explanation, a physical manifestation of their terror and suffering. The vampire, in this light, transforms from a mere bogeyman into a testament to our ancestors' profound struggle for survival, a cautionary tale etched into the very fabric of our collective memory. As the ash settled and the world healed, the fear remained, immortalized not in stone, but in legend. When Fire Met Blood invites you to forever reconsider the origins of the monsters that still haunt our dreams, reminding us that sometimes the deepest fears are born not from hell, but from the heart of our own planet.